Hello and welcome to this review of my GMMK Pro keyboard. This was a donation from Glorious themselves. I showed an unboxing of it a while ago and it came with a plethora of optional extras, which I'll talk about in a bit. I must admit that nowadays MX-type hot swap keyboards are kind of beyond my area of interest, but this one was special enough that I accepted, and I'm glad I did because it's actually quite interesting in the bigger picture. I'm late to the party as always. Apparently pretty much every other YouTuber on the planet has already done a review on this, although to be honest I haven't watched any of them. But judging by all the requests, thankfully people still want to see my Neolithic perspective of this keyboard anyway. The company behind it are called Glorious PC Gaming Race, formerly Glorious PC Master Race, but ironically that name wasn't considered PC enough due to connotations of slavery. Which is of course ridiculous. I mean, nobody would call console gamers slaves. Just filthy peasants. Also, apparently they wanted to get a separate identity from the original PCMR meme, which I guess is why they also changed their stickers and whatnot. I reviewed the original GMMK, short for Glorious Modular Mechanical Keyboard by the way, quite a while ago. It was one of the first commercial hot swap keyboards out there, especially in full size. But nowadays hot swappability is a fairly common trait, so they decided to make a new one with a completely different take on it that would set it apart from other hot swap models. The concept is what they call an ultra-premium, gasket-mounted 75% keyboard, all three of which are traits that are quite different from the original, which was fairly basic, not gasket mount, and wasn't available in 75%, so it's quite a radical departure. The only thing it shares pretty much is that it's hot swappable. Hot swappability is, in my opinion, an extremely useful trait that's become more valuable as time progressed. Originally more of a gimmick, the increased diversity of MX pin-compatible switches on the market means that users can now get better control of what switches they want to use in a keyboard. So even if you just put switches in once and never actually swap them out, you can choose from a much wider variety of switches than the usual selection of Cherry MX switches and clones that's commercially commonly available. For example, suppose you want a keyboard with box pink or royal, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find a commercial keyboard with those in, if they even exist at all, but with this you can just put them in yourself. Plus of course you can experiment with other switches without having to buy a new chassis or go soldering, so hot swappability is definitely a useful feature in my opinion. One major upgrade from the original is that the GMMK Pro has fixing pin holes in the PCB, which means that switches with fixing pins, which are these things, are compatible with the keyboard. The original didn't have those, so switches with fixing pins didn't fit, which was a major, and frankly rather silly, oversight in the design. Now the most interesting bit here is the Ultra Premium designation. It's really that which caught my attention. This manifests itself in not just a slew of optional extras that you can get for it, but a premium chassis, plate gaskets, pre-lubricated stabilizers, a programmable rotary knob here, and some other small tidbits. As a side note, please note that the keycaps and the switches were optional extras too, both of which are also called Glorious. The switches deserve some special mention, I'll get back to those later in the video. Furthermore, they also provided a glorious wooden wrist rest, a glorious carrying case, a glorious coiled cable, glorious switch and keycap pullers, a glorious toy, and a glorious cleaning kit, comprising a glorious dishcloth, a glorious brushette, and a glorious enema balloon. They apparently even market a glorious lube station, which, together with the balloon, sounds like it could make for a series of glorious evenings. All in all, it's a bit over $200 worth of extras, which is actually slightly more than the keyboard itself cost. A small rundown so you know at least something about what you're getting. The wrist rest is quite comfortable and they do padded designs as well apparently. The wire pullers are pretty standard and the switch puller is a known design as well, although these are branded and therefore relatively expensive. But these are very useful tools to have on hand. Wire pullers aren't as good for pulling big keycaps as ring pullers like this are, but they're much better for single unit keycaps. And this sort of switch puller is way better than this simpler design. So even if you don't get them from Glorious themselves, it's good to get these tools from somewhere at least. The two-part coiled cable is very stout, and the connection in the middle here is apparently so that you can disconnect it without wearing out the actual end connectors. I've been told that's a community thing based on aviation cables. It's extremely sturdy, but the coil is more for show than anything else because it barely stretches. Please note that the cable and the two pullers are more luxurious versions of what already ships with the keyboard by default, so you do already get these things out of the box, just less nice versions of them. The toy is sadly non-functional. I had kind of hoped it was one of those novel keys big switches like this one, but whatever, it's a cute gesture I guess. The cleaning kit could be useful actually. I didn't have a turkey baster yet, and it's cleaner than blowing spittle into your switches I guess. Although if you bring it to your office you might get inquisitive looks and or embarrassing questions. The keycaps are very thick dye-sublimed PBT, apparently made in-house by Glorious themselves. This particular set is in a 3-tone blue colorway. They're extremely tough. I'm sure that this will hold up for a long time, but of course they don't let the backlight through the lettering, and I think I would have preferred it if they stuck the letters in the top left instead of in the middle, but that's just my opinion. Similarly, keys like Tab and Shift are aligned to the cap edge, but Control and Alt are not, which is kind of weird, and I like the edge aligned look better to be honest. However, I do like the small caps letters on these keys, and the font looks nice and clean too, and the lettering is very sharp indeed, which is excellent. Ironically, the enter key on this one says Ascend, which is usually the exact opposite of what an enter key does, but it's part of their identity, I guess. Anyway, they're $50 a set, and they're compatible with both full size and the 75% layout. They also have shine-through pudding sets for $35. A quick word on the rotary knob here before I move on to the build quality. It's pretty nice and ratcheted as well. By default it controls the volume, and it has a press function as well, which by default is mute, but it can be reprogrammed. Do note that it only changes volume by 2% with each ratchet, and it's somewhat stiff, so going from 0 to 100% looks like this. That could have been better. Anyway, let's talk about the Ultra Premium chassis. It consists of a machined aluminium case. Please note the presence of 2 eyes in aluminium for those of you who don't speak English properly, and it comes with an aluminium mounting plate as well. So the case is basically a metal brick, and the weight is accordingly massive, including keycaps and switches. It's around 1,750 grams, or in imperial units, 11T apostrophe quotation mark pizza burger hot dogs. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the same weight as an IBM SSK Model M, and remember that this is both smaller and it has a chassis made out of aluminium, not steel. If it had been steel, I reckon it could have given a Model F a run for its money heft-wise, because it feels like an adamantium monolith already. And it's a wraparound case too, not one with those exposed floating switches that you see on many modern boards. I approve. In any case, it's turbo tough. This is going to last you a while. Definitely feels like a high quality product. Maybe ultra premium isn't quite the term I would have used, but it's impressive nonetheless. Machine cases like this are very reminiscent of custom keyboards that often go for a similar style, sometimes adding a metal weight in the bottom to add yet more heft. Those weights are generally brass, which is even denser than steel, but I think that's kind of cheating because that doesn't really make the keyboard tougher, just heavier. But I digress. It also comes with gaskets, which are located between the mounting plate and the PCB. Now, the idea behind gaskets is twofold. First, to dampen the noise, and second, to provide a bouncier key feel, as gasket mount keyboards don't use screws to fix the two together. Now, to me, making your keyboard a fraction bouncier sounds like one of the most pointless things anyone ever came up with. Seriously, guys, if plate bounciness is something that matters to you, you should really get out there and try some keyboards that are actually different. But to be honest, this keyboard doesn't really feel flexy at all because the mounting plate is so solid and the gaskets are quite firm. Acoustically, I guess it is quieter like this, but the chassis is so rock hard that I can't detect as much as a smidgen of bimsy bouncy burger. They also do mounting plates made out of brass and polycarb, and those might give a different result. Plus, apparently they're looking into the whole non-flexi gaskets thing at the moment, so I suspect they'll wobblify the keyboard in the future. Finally, the switches. These are Glorious's own Glorious Panda switches, which are a commercial repro of Holy Panda switches, more or less, with the difference that they come pre-lubed and that they're in actual commercial production, whereas the original Holy Pandas were just homemade MX hack jobs. Interestingly, Glorious used the original Invear tooling for the housings and the contact leaves to make these Panda switches. Holy Pandas took off like a rocket, but they were very difficult and expensive to obtain for a long time. There were some non-original repro batches from Drop, but these Glorious Panda switches being in actual production and coming pre-lubed, let alone being fairly competitively priced, $36 for $25, almost half of what they cost on Drop, has made them very popular very quickly, and a review of them has been much requested. Like the Holy Pandas they're directly based on, they're said to be extremely tactile by some in the community, which they're not, and very rounded feeling, which again they're not, or not really at least. Here's a force curve of Glorious Pandas. As you can see, barring some weighting differences, it's extremely similar to that of Holy Pandas, as well as of Input Club's Halo switches that Holy Pandas were originally based on, hence the name. But neither are very rounded nor extremely tactile. This is what an extremely tactile switch looks like, and this is what an extremely rounded feeling switch looks like. Quite a big difference, as you can see. Anyway, they do feel actually tactile, which admittedly is a minor miracle on its own for an MX type switch, and they do feel somewhat drawn out, but they still can't shake the sawtoothy, grimy feel that every MX type tactile switch has. Also, the drawn-out tactile bump causes the switches to feel stiffer than you might think, as a higher force is maintained for longer. Smoothness is of course a bit difficult to ascertain for a sawtoothy switch, but I must admit I wouldn't have guessed that these were lubed. Overall, I'm not super impressed by them, but frankly it's very hard to find tactile switches that actually feel good in my opinion, especially modern ones. I much prefer the tactility that clicky switches can offer generally. However, these Holy Panda switches do fit the idea of this keyboard like a glove when you think about it. To elaborate on that last point, having a YouTube channel with loads of people commenting on your videos, as well as reading the boards of several keyboard communities, gives me a good insight into the wide range of tastes and wishes of other keyboard enthusiasts. And what I've learned is that most of them are after fundamentally different things than I am, because frankly, this is not the sort of keyboard, nor the type of switches, I myself would typically buy. See, personally, I am mainly after switch feel and switch sound. I look for the way a keyboard feels and sounds, and I accept that to achieve that, you sometimes need to dig very deep and find some very obscure sources to get that. But most keyboard users don't want to more or less literally sift through piles of rubbish to find ancient keyboards filled with cobwebs, which have little or no customizability. Obviously, everyone's welcome to their own opinions, and if something works for you, that's great. That's not the point I'm trying to make. But I've seen that many enthusiasts that are into modern keyboards know that if you want the better key feel, you can go IBM or Alps or Hall Effect or Optoelectric or one of the many alternatives out there. And they know that if you want a nice sounding keyboard with a full bassy typing noise, a modern small rigid chassis is never going to cut it compared to a big old resonating vintage one. The acoustics just aren't there. However, what the MX platform offers more than anything else out there by far is customizability, the ability to choose from a huge range of keycaps to build a board from the ground up, to use massive machined cases like this with gaskets in a huge variety of layouts and form factors. They care about the keyboard itself much more than I do. For example, this old laser VTCL keyboard is a plastic piece of shit, barely tougher than a cardboard pizza box, but it's got great switches, so I still love it. In other words, MX-type switches, including Holy and Glorious Pandas, are for people who don't actually care about switches. They just care about the chassis or commercial availability, and that's where this keyboard comes in. That's why this is such a good fit. The chassis itself is $170 compared to $70 for a bare-bones GMMK one, so it's more than twice as expensive as the GMMK one, but you do get quite a bit more keyboard for it as well, of course. Granted, you still need to buy switches and keycaps, but I'd say that price is fairly reasonable. I'm guessing they're basing their profit mainly on all the extras they sell with it. So, the bigger picture revealed, this keyboard is for two types of people. Those who want to get a keyboard with non-standard switches and don't mind paying for an extra tough chassis and volume knob, and those who want something that's similar to a Korean custom type keyboard but more easily obtainable and for less money. Prices on those vary widely from a few hundred to a few thousand. My tip, get this and one of the keycap sets and stick some box jades or box pinks or something like that in. Solid build with solid switches for $250. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.